weekend in November, it is one of the few feast days that can be transferred over to a Sunday. All Saints' Day, the official date in the calendar, is November the 1st, which was Friday. So you might be asking the question, well, why are we switching it to a Sunday? What makes it so important that we remember these people called saints? And there are a couple of answers to that, and I'm going to offer some reflections with you. The first is on the practical side. As the church was gathered in its prayer life and in its life of Christ, they recognized very early on that there were people who exemplified the love of God in the world. Those who were able to communicate the good news of Jesus Christ in an effective way that touched the lives and the hearts of many. The problem is, as the church grew, so did the number of saints, and that's a good problem to have. And there's only 365 days in the year. Some of those are dedicated as feasts of Jesus, right? So those can't be used for saints' days. So what do? We only have 365 days in the calendar, and thousands, if not hundreds of thousands and millions of saints. So the church, in her infinite wisdom, said, we will set aside a day in which we remember all the saints who don't have a special day of their own. All the saints who have preached the gospel, have made God's love known, and have let the world understand that Jesus Christ came to transform us, to set us free, and to make us whole. So that's the rationale behind the calendar day. But what about the idea of sainthood in general? Why remember these holy people, these men and women in the life of the church, and indeed in the life of the world? Because there are some secular saints that still permeate the secular calendar too. If you think of March 17th, everybody knows about St. Patrick, right? So there is still a vestige of memory within our society and the world that saints are important people to remember. So why is that? I think the temptation sometimes is to think, well, I can't be a saint. That's crazy. Saints are the people in the windows of stained glass with halos on their heads. They are the ones that have led perfect and pure lives untouched by sin or challenge. The problem with that notion is that if you actually dig deep into the lives of the saints, you'll find out that they're just like you and me. They, like all of us here, have been called to witness to the love of Christ, but that doesn't mean that they're perfect. Let me give you two examples, and we'll go from there. One of the great saints of the church is, of course, St. Augustine. This great giant of a theologian who helped us understand the idea of the incarnation, the fact that God came in human flesh so that we and him would be united forever in love. He also gave us a way to understand the world around us. The fact that because the world is affected by sin, it means that bad things are going to happen in the world. And we, as a people of faith, are called to recognize that brokenness and yet strive to make it whole. But even this great theologian, this great bishop of the church, struggled in his faith. And he struggled in one of my favorite ways possible. See, because early on, before his conversion, Augustine was known around town as somebody who liked to enjoy the festivities and celebrations around him, often with much drink and food and liveliness. And it was no secret that he was particularly fond of spending time with women. And so there's a famous line attributed to him from his Confessions as he's recalling this point in his life. And he says, often in that time, I would pray, "O Lord, grant me chastity, make me a better person," but not yet. Similarly, we have Saint Teresa of Avila, who was this great saint, somebody who invited the people of God to be immersed in spiritual practices, particularly in the cloistered life for those who are nuns. And the thing with Teresa was that she was known to have a little bit of a temper. And so there's a story that goes around about her life in which she was once traveling on the road and she got caught in a storm. And the rains were so bad and the roads became so muddy and impassable that she got fed up trying to drag her donkey down the road. And in her frustration and in her anger, she looked up to the heavens and said, "God, if this is how you treat your friends, no wonder you have so many enemies." The saints are people just like you and me. The saints are people who have flaws. Sometimes their lives don't go perfectly. Sometimes they stray away from the love of God, even for a prolonged period. And yet, they find their way back. On this Feast of All Saints, we give our thanks for those who have shaped us in faith. And not necessarily just in Christian faith, but of course, that's important too. Today, we take the time to recognize those who have helped us to know that we are loved. Those who have helped us to know that we have value. And perhaps the greatest part of All Saints is that in this proclamation, in this good news, we find that we are part of something that is larger than ourselves. We are not alone. We come knowing that we are surrounded by a family of faith that will uphold us and make us strong. And today, we enter Eva into that family of God. We celebrate the gifts and talents that she will share, both with us and with the world. Even though it's sometimes difficult to think of ourselves as saints, I promise you, you are. in our common baptismal promises that we make today and renew constantly. We are the sons and daughters of the Most High. We are new creations in the water and Spirit through Jesus Christ. And so, for all that you have, for all that you are, for all the gifts and talents which you offer, both to this place and to the world, I give thanks that you are the saints of God, that you are here, that you are amongst us, willing to spread that joy and that new life with others. As we continue through this service, I would encourage you to pray for Eva, to ask for God's blessing in her life, because as we've learned, both in the gospel and in the lives of the saints, Jesus tells us that the journey is not always going to go smooth. There will be times when we are turned away. There are times when we will mourn. There will be times when we are hungry and thirsty. But in those times, we are surrounded by the saints. In those times, we are lifted up and made whole. And when we find ourselves in a healthy place again, because faith constantly renews us, when we find ourselves in a healthy place again, we too join into the mission of God in bringing the kingdom, feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, clothing the naked, and loving our neighbors as ourselves. So again, to you, the sons and daughters of God, for those who are the saints of the church, and for Eva, who joins that blessed company and brings all of her vitality to us and to the world. For that I say, thanks be to God, and amen.